Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation podcast network.
I think one thing that I really struggled with at the beginning of my chronic illness journey was feeling like everything was lost. And I had this feeling of overwhelm and catastrophizing, which I'm sure you understand is such a huge part of anxiety, feeling everything is just gone. But you come to realize that there are just new ways of doing things and you find new joys.
Welcome to Talking Head Pain, the podcast that confronts head pain head on. I'm your host, Sarah Shaw, Senior Manager of BIPOC Community Outreach at the Global Healthy Living Foundation. I have been living with chronic migraine for almost 10 years, and I'm very open about navigating life with my chronic disease journey as well as my experience living with anxiety. This podcast will be a window into other patients' lives as they navigate their own journeys living with chronic pain, migraine, and mental health. Today, we are joined by Simar, a migraine advocate and student living in Australia who runs an Instagram account called Study with Migraine. Hi, Simar. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. I'm so happy to have you on and to dive into this conversation. I like to start off each episode by asking our guests if you could use one word or adjective to describe your migraine attacks, what would it be?
I think for me, it would be kind of ongoing just because I'm living with refractory migraine at the moment. So I'm chronic, but they're kind of intractable. So I'm stable, but they're just never ending. So that's how I would describe it, ongoing.
Ongoing is a very good word to use. I feel like when it was chronic every single day, it was when will this pain end? When will it stop? When will I find relief? And I feel like a lot of our listeners can relate to that sense of ongoing, and a lot of people that don't live with chronic ongoing pain can't really understand that. And I know you and I have had some conversations online about people not understanding that it means that I'm in pain every single day and that sometimes there's no relief. And I appreciate you talking about that.
Yeah, I think sometimes what a lot of people don't realize as well is that even if you're not in pain all the time or in pain every single day, you still have symptoms, some kind of symptoms every single day. And other symptoms can be more debilitating than your pain. So something like photophobia or feeling dizzy or feeling faint or nauseous, sometimes that can really just mean you need to lie in bed or have a nap. That can really stop you from getting through the work that you need to do during the day.
It's very distracting, right?
Exactly.
It's very hard to focus and do work and, live when you have, like you said, you mentioned these other symptoms of migraine. It's not just the pain, it's the photophobia, it's the nausea. It's very hard to do anything when you have nausea. It's very hard to do anything when you're dizzy. How are you walking? How are you driving? How are you focusing on writing a paper? And I know we're going to dive into a little bit of that. I want to pick your brain and talk to you about your Instagram account, and we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But first, I want to kind of dig into, migraine affects a lot of women. And that's something that is very common and it's very well known in the migraine community. As we know, being a person of color, it can lead to different obstacles in our access to healthcare or being believed or different struggles. And I wanted to know for you, for your experience, did you find that you dealt with any issues like getting a migraine diagnosis or anything else in kind of your migraine care being a woman of color?
Well, the first thing I noticed was that our family doctor was the kind of doctor that my whole family and I, my sister, my parents and I had been seeing for 20 years, the whole time we'd been living in Australia. And I had been living with another chronic pain disorder that wasn't affecting my head, but just the rest of my body. And then when I started having migraine attacks, the first thing that my doctor kind of did, he laughed at me. And it wasn't in a kind of snarky way, but it was just in a kind of, oh, it must not be that serious. He wasn't really worried. And he literally said, sometimes symptoms are psychosomatic. And I was like, yes, I do acknowledge that I deal with mental health issues. That's valid. But I don't think that would be leading to me throwing up.
Right.
And me lying in bed. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't seem plausible for me to have a 72-hour attack from a mental health issue.
Right. As I like to say, the math ain't mathin'. The numbers aren't connecting. I hear the words that you're saying, but for me to, like you said, be laying there in pain for 72 hours and throwing up and the nausea, I'm sorry, but anxiety, mental health, depression, that's not what happens when we're living with mental health issues. There are other figures at play that I wish that you had had the empathy and the wanting to dig into it more. So, like, sometimes what happens is I feel like sometimes
Mm,
when doctors are don't know what's going on, they like to, especially for women, as women of color,
mhm,
they like to play everything out on mental health issues. And a very common thing that happens for women is, oh, it's just anxiety. Oh, it's just depression. Oh, it's just stress. And that's such a common thing that, happened to me in my journey and a lot of other women that I speak to. That's the first diagnosis that they get before they get the migraine diagnosis. So I want to know, what did you do after you had that experience? Did you seek care elsewhere? Did you advocate for yourself? How did you get from the doctor that told you that your symptoms were psychosomatic to now I have a migraine diagnosis?
yeah, so I actually started seeing a different doctor. I was so mad. I was like, "This doctor is being really defensive." I think I was like, "I am a mystery case for him, and I think he's just really upset that he can't figure me out." So he's coming up with the most plausible solution in his own head because he doesn't have the education to really figure out what's going on. So I did some Googling of my own, and I found a neurologist, and I found like a different GP. So I went to a different medical practice. I asked to be referred to a neurologist, and that family doctor was really nice and they referred me elsewhere. And he believed me, and it was a much more progressive clinic as well. And they took me much more seriously. So I find sometimes women take me more seriously because this was a male doctor that hadn't taken me very seriously. And he hadn't taken me very seriously with my other chronic pain condition either. But once I saw the neurologist, who was a female neurologist, she was able to start me on some other medications that started helping as well.
I think, unfortunately, it's a very common thing that happens to women in the chronic illness space, especially when we're dealing with invisible illnesses that people cannot see.
Yeah.
I think when you can't see the pain, there is this barrier that blocks us from getting the care that we need. And I know for me, I specifically seek out like women doctors. And for me, I specifically seek out
Mm.
women of color because I feel I'm the most believed by women of color. I can connect with them. It's just there's something that is unspoken about being able to see that there's this unspoken understanding, I think, that happens. And
Yeah.
every single woman of color that I've been able to see, whether it's for my migraine or my anxiety, these or my endometriosis, my invisible illnesses, it's I'm 100% believed and supported and validated. And what I hope for the future is for other people to follow suit so that way we don't have to bounce around from doctor to doctor to doctor to be believed.
I think looking for doctors like of color, women of color, but then also finding ones who understand anxiety and mental health, I feel like is really important as well. Because I started seeing a headache specialist and a new neurologist recently, and I feel like she takes my symptoms and migraine really seriously. I feel like some neurologists tend to take other neurological conditions seriously, like epilepsy, stroke, traumatic brain injury, which is so valid. I totally understand that. But then I feel like, kind of tend to neglect migraine. And I think they don't understand how disabling it really is. So she was a good doctor, but I think she didn't really believe how much it had really upended my life. So respect to her, but that's why I started seeing a different doctor.
I'm glad that you advocated for yourself and got the help that you needed and the treatment that you deserved. And I think a lot of people, like especially for me when I was younger, I didn't know that I could advocate for myself. And to hear you,
Yeah.
speak up and be like, something's not right and I deserve better care, I think is amazing. And I think is very inspiring for other people to listen to know that you deserved better and you deserve to be believed. And you also talked about a mix of, dealing with mental health issues like anxiety and living with migraine, two things that are very invisible that not a lot of people can see and empathize with. I want to switch gears a little bit. And we normally hear a lot about older people living with migraine. Like when a lot of people hear the word migraine, it's often like associated with people that are older women, older white women navigating life and jobs. but we don't really hear about like the stories and the experiences about young adults like living with migraine and navigating college and university. And that was one of the things that really drew me to you was your account. And I want to know if you don't mind like sharing about like the obstacles that you've experienced as a student living with migraine while navigating college, which in of itself is like its own adventure. So do you mind talking to us about that?
Yeah, of course. I think probably the biggest obstacle has been kind of communicating to my peers and kind of trying to like bridge the gap of understanding there, obviously, because people my own age, most of them don't live with chronic illness or haven't experienced chronic pain. Obviously, that might change as we get older, things happen. I think party culture, especially in Australia, drinking culture is really big. I don't go out or drink as much anymore just because, one, I don't like it, two, it's not good for my head. But yeah, just trying to communicate as much with my friends and close friends has been, I think, the biggest challenge. A year living with chronic migraine, I have improved, but it has been pretty difficult to navigate. I think university has been really accommodating. As I mentioned on my account, I have registered with disability services and they do let me sit exams alone and they give me extensions for assignments and things like that. But yeah, I would say the feeling of like isolation from my peers is probably the most intense thing.
Yeah, I can only imagine how isolating that must be, as my migraines didn't really pick up until I was 6 months after graduating college. And
Mm.
I give props to seriously any student living with migraine attacks, daily migraine attacks, even episodic migraine attacks, and how that is navigating not only college life, like exams, studying, going to class, but also being a young person and like, hanging out with your friends and going to social events, out to the bar, or like you said, party culture. Like we have to navigate the world differently than our quote unquote able bodied peers. And when you don't have people that kind of understand what you're going through, it can be very isolating. And a lot of people can maybe misunderstand the reason for you not engaging or not interacting is not because you don't want to. Of course, you want to still engage and interact with your social life the way that you always used to, but you're unable to due to migraine. And what I like to say to people is that it's not that I'm unreliable, it's that my chronic illness is unreliable. And that's what's making life so difficult. And we have to, like you mentioned, you can't drink because of your head. Like that alcohol
Mhm.
is a very huge trigger for a lot of migraine patients. And when you have a society that's a huge part of college life, you are kind of left out. What's one thing that I guess you wish you could tell people that are out there in a similar situation as you, where they're struggling to kind of acclimate to life with a chronic illness like migraine?
I guess I would say that whilst it is really isolating at first, there are ways to socialize with your peers, even if it's not in the traditional sense in like a bar or in like some really crazy overstimulating environment. Maybe in like an outdoor arena, you find, I guess, new ways to do things. And I guess the grief is really ongoing. But I think one thing that I really struggled with at the beginning of my chronic illness journey was feeling like everything was lost. And I had this like feeling of overwhelm and like catastrophizing, which I'm sure you understand is like such a huge part of anxiety, feeling
Yeah.
everything is just gone. But I think you come to realize that there are just like new ways of doing things and you just like you find a way to re-navigate your college experience. You find like new joys. But yeah, that's something that I'm always working on though. Like the anxious mind loves to catastrophize. So
Anxiety is a friend that you don't want, that just knock, knock, knock. Hello, are you there? It's there when I wake up. It's there when I go to sleep. And you add migraine on top of that. It's like they're the two annoying siblings that I didn't want to engage with. But I love what you said about re-navigating. I think that's really beautiful about, learning kind of like when you miss a stop in life, when you're on your GPS and you miss a turn, but you're able to reroute and reacclimate or readjust and re-engage with the world in a different way. And what really should be happening ideally is the world should be more accommodating to us. It shouldn't always have to be us readjusting to the world. I wish the world was more accepting of people with disabilities and that employers were more acceptable. And, I'm really lucky where I work at a job where I know if I'm having a migraine attack and I cannot work, I'm able to take my medicine and lay down and wait for my medicine to sit in. And not every employer is like that. And you mentioned earlier talking about accommodations. And I know that so many people would benefit from listening to this conversation. If you wouldn't mind going into talking about how you navigated that, how you navigated getting accommodations, what was the process like? And what are some tips you can share with our listeners about seeking out accommodations for the first time in university?
Yeah, I think most universities, especially like in Australia, Canada, the US, have pretty good disability services. They're not perfect, but the first thing I did was like just Google like University of Sydney Disability Services. I hopped on a call with like the disability counselor, and she actually recommended to me what we could do for my symptoms. She was like, we can put you in a room with natural light for your exams, because if we put you in a room with the rest of the students in the new building with the fluorescent lights, like, and you have brain fog during your exam, your performance is poor, it's really not ideal. You can have extensions for your assignments. I was like, that would be really helpful. I already had like a prior academic plan in place for like another condition, so it was just an add-on from that. And I think if I have an attack, I can apply for special consideration for like a further extension on top of the one that I already have. So there are lots of different things that you can add on. I also there are things that I do that my university, because like I said, it's not perfect. Sometimes they do say to me, there are things that you have to do that we can't like accommodate. So they're like, you have to bring your own textbooks. So we can't give you a textbook or like print things out for you, because like, you can't look at a screen sometimes.
Right.
So I'll be printing things out and preparing for class. So I'll be honest, like a lot of it is on me. Like I find that a lot of the time I have to do a lot of extra preparation. I think a lot of people living with migraine like have to do more work, because we just live in we're trying to adjust to a world for able-bodied people. And I so agree with you. I wish the world was more accommodating for us, and they try to do what they can, but most of the work I do feel like is on me, but it's good to ask for what you can. But yeah, asking for extensions and extra time on exams has really helped me as well, because I have like an autoimmune condition as well. So sometimes my hands can hurt when writing assessment. So that's helped as well.
Has it helped for you, since I know you said you already had something in place, but getting a doctor's note explaining your condition to get disability services, is that something that you had to do as well to kind of get accepted into accommodations?
Yeah, so they actually had this like long form. I think it was like a bit too long. There's lots of red tape around it, but they just had like I think 6 or 7 page kind of form. And the doctor had to explain like what kind of accommodations I need and how kind of severe my level of disability was and how often my attacks were. And that's how I got the accommodations. It was just from my family doctor. I didn't have to go to the neurologist to get it. So it wasn't too bad.
That's good. I'm glad that you realized, okay, this is something me going into university that I'm going to need to adjust to, and I'm going to need accommodations for. And I know for me, growing up, I had a learning disability. And I was very ashamed of it, I'm going to admit. And so when I went to college, I remember my dad would tell me, you need to go to the Office of Disability Services and like explain to them. But I had so much shame that I felt like I was less than. And like now, I'm so far into my migraine journey and like in the advocacy world, and I see that. And I see you and I see you, standing up for yourself and advocating for yourself. And I wish, I could tell younger me, hey, listen, like it's going to be okay. There's nothing wrong for you to ask for accommodations. If anything, it's going to make your experience at college better. And I think that's exactly what you're doing and what you're doing with your Instagram account about sharing tips and tricks to help young people make their experience at college as best it can be with the hand that they've been dealt with living with a number of chronic. It applies to more than just chronic migraine, but with like anxiety, with depression, with arthritis, with fibromyalgia, other invisible illnesses. And so I think you really took like the reins and you kind of took the narrative in your story to kind of make things work for you. And I just appreciate that you're around and you exist and you already are making so much change in the migraine community. Like you just made a post the other day about like tips for doing accommodations and it's helped so many people. And I saw so many comments saying, I wish I had this when I was younger. And so I just know that you're making a really positive impact on the community by leaving these tips for future, migraine elders and future migraine university people. And so I appreciate you for paving the way for that.
Yeah. And saying that also, like, it was really hard for me because similarly to you, I also struggled with kind of self blame. I did feel kind of ashamed and like, I was like, maybe migraine is my fault. Maybe I did something to make it so bad. It took me about a year after being diagnosed to make the study with migraine account and really start advocating for myself. But I was like, I need help because I can't really see any students or college students in this space. And I need to raise awareness and kind of share tips that helped me. And maybe I can help other people as well. So it takes time, I think, to build up the courage. So I totally relate to your experience.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's not going to happen overnight. You mentioned grieving and you mentioned adjusting and taking time. And I think as people who, I don't want to say who were once able-bodied, but now have a chronic condition, that you have to learn how to re-engage with the world in a different way. I know we kind of touched on this earlier about living with migraine attacks can be very isolating. I want to turn it around and see what sort of self-care tips do you do for you to make sure that you're taking care of you?
I think it doesn't sound like self-care because I feel like a lot of self-care tips are a lot of like spending time on your own and like bubble baths and stuff like that. But a lot of my self-care is like interacting with the migraine community because it helps me feel less alone and just like understood. So nobody else in my immediate family lives with migraine. It's just me. They're very supportive, but obviously they can't really understand. So interacting with people on Instagram living with migraine really helps me. Just reading about migraine and kind of staying up to date helps me as well. And also, I think doing my own self-care. So making sure I'm sleeping well, like 8 to 10 hours and eating regularly and not pushing myself too hard because I think we can all do that and that can really trigger an attack as well.
Absolutely. I know you said it's not self-care, but it 100,000% is self-care. Engaging in a community helps not only letting us know that we're not alone, but it helps our mental health because I feel like for so long as women, we're, especially like women of color, we're told like to not talk about our pain and that it's something that makes us look weak or all of these other things. But in fact, like I feel like the fact that we live with this pain makes us that much stronger. And also taking care of you, like you said, like making sure you're eating, getting enough sleep and not pushing yourself too much and not being too hard on yourself. Those are all wonderful things that we can do for ourselves because society is already hard enough on ourselves as it is. And living with anxiety is also completely exhausting and we're already hard on ourselves. So taking that extra time to take care of you is so important. Simar, it's been so wonderful talking to you, learning more about your journey and what you're doing for the migraine community. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we end here?
No, I think so. I think you touched on everything, especially wanted to talk about just re-navigating the world and overcoming that experience of isolation because I really do think it does get better, especially if you work on like not catastrophizing as much, but it's hard.
It is hard. It's hard, but the more that we do it, I think the easier it becomes. And knowing that you're not the only one alone out there dealing with it makes the journey a little bit easier.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for listening to this episode of Talking Head Pain, the podcast that confronts head pain head on. If you like this episode, please give it an honest 5-star rating, write a positive review, and spread the word by sharing with your friends and family. It'll help more people like you find us. I'm Sarah Shaw, and I will see you next time.
Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation Podcast Network.